everybody. Welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffith. And as always, we've got an amazing real talk with a real leader who blows my mind, folks. Before we jump into it, I want to give a shout out and some thanks to our founding partners, CMD Agency, Felicia Hall Allen and Associates, and our digital agency, 628. So today we've got Natalie White. She's the founder of Moolah Kicks. And she's joining us from New York City in the office. Thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely, Shauna. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's kind of been in the works for a while, so thanks for bearing with me.
No, 100%. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So folks, I always give people some context for how I know the guests. So I know Natalie from a mutual friend of ours named Tony Schiller. He's an executive at Paragon Sports Marketing. He's a friend of mine. He's been on the show. But I tell you a kind of a funny story. So I knew Natalie before I knew Natalie. So when the brand launched, I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And so my other friend, Natalie White, who's SVP at the LA Sparks, the WNBA team, I texted her and I'm like, oh my God, Natalie, how did you do this and your regular job? She's like, yeah, no, Shauna, that's not me. So actually I told that story to you, Natalie, when we first met. It was so crazy. But it made me so glad to finally meet you. I'm just so impressed with you as an up and coming leader, with what you're doing with the brand. So I would love for you to just give folks some context about Moolah Kicks. What are you doing? You're absolutely taking the industry by storm. So give us your take on what you're up to.
Of course. So I am not the LA Sparks Natalie White, but I did start Moolah Kicks about 3 years ago, which is the only basketball brand specifically focused on women's hoops. And we are the only brand built by and for female ballers, making sneakers that are fit biomechanically for our feet and reflect our game. And the importance of that is that before Moolah Kicks, female basketball players from kindergarten through professional were playing in sneakers that weren't only named after NBA players, but were actually molded on the inside for the male foot form. And when we did that, it negatively impacts your performance level and puts you at risk for knee, ankle, and leg injuries that are so common in women's hoops. So when I first started the brand, I had no idea of the performance implications, but what really got me fired up was the social implications and what Moolah is doing as the only for-profit business in women's basketball, right? Every dollar that we earn goes directly back into either making more products for female hoopers or higher marketing and sponsorship dollars. And so in that way, we're really growing the ecosystem of opportunity within women's hoops for players, for business women, for fans, really for every aspect of women's basketball.
Yeah, it's so fantastic. It's so good to hear. And I think I've shared with you before, I played basketball at the University of Michigan. And oh my God, when I think back to the shoes that we wore, and then one of my teammates, so my freshman year, we had those Reeboks that had the pumps on the tongue.
Reebok pump. I know them. I've had them.
Okay, so that one of my teammates, I remember her name, Makisha. She used to call them bricks. They like the shoes themselves, just because exactly what you're saying, they didn't fit the feet well. We then became I think we then went to Nike, and so I don't know, at the time I felt they fit better, but I mean, like, I remember coming up and like ACL injuries were so common for the women, and I felt like it was more so for the women than the men. So that's really great for you to share that with us, that it actually has implications for injury and performance. I love that part of it.
Yeah, and ACL injuries are still incredibly common in women's basketball. Same with ankle injuries. Really, a lot of leg and foot and ankle injuries are very common in women's hoops, and or even typically quote unquote overuse injuries.
Right.
And I think the reason behind that overuse is because the footwear isn't fitting correctly, right? So
Yeah.
it's overuse in the wrong places because you're wearing the only piece of equipment time and time again that is negatively affecting how your body's moving.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And when I was coming up, we had to have our ankles taped for every single practice and every single game. And so, I mean, I actually have no idea if that still goes on. But I would imagine that like your shoe may have to cut down on that kind of, you know.
Yeah, we actually have our shoe design intentionally has ankle built in, a dual ankle support. So you
Oh,
can either
nice.
lace the shoes all the way to the top
Uh-huh.
and have the built in, or you can actually take out the top two laces and expand it because so many girls and women wear ankle support, right? Whether it's taping or braces, and you want to make sure that there's room for them to play how they want to and to wear what they want to as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So funny, as we were saying this, I started thinking about some of the people that I had been able to introduce you to. So Shimmy Gray,
Yeah.
who is a coach at the collegiate level, I was so excited when I introduced you, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, Natalie, I totally know your shoes." And she was talking about how she had some of her players wearing them and everything. So for anybody who's listening, just letting you know that like this is truly already penetrating
Yeah.
sort of the landscape, and it's so exciting to know. So this is more than footwear for you. I know that from our conversations, you're truly making an impact on the game. And I know for me, like I started playing ball when I was 10, and I always had this desire to give back to the sport that I felt gave so much to
Yeah.
me. So like, can you give the audience an understanding of like the impact that a little bit more about the impact that you're making, and a bit about clearly like the passion that you have for what you're doing?
Yeah, I think, there's no one, I don't believe, really, that can make an impact in this sport like a brand that's solely dedicated to it, because for a couple reasons. And I think the biggest is what I was talking about with being a for-profit business and the money going back into the sport. Right now, so many women's sports are kind of considered a charity
Mm,
and something you should feel good about watching, something you should support. And that messaging is very harmful to the way that we see female athletes, right? Women's basketball players have been around for a very long time and are playing despite so many factors,
yeah.
right? They don't need my support. They don't need empowerment. They don't need more confidence. They don't need support. Everything is already there. And if you are a women's basketball player or if you're a fan, you already understand the talent, the hype, and all of the camaraderie that already exists within women's hoops.
Mm,
And so I think for so long, women's basketball has kind of been looking across the court at men's basketball and asking for things that we think will make it look more similar to men's.
mm,
And I think with Moolah, there's an opportunity to do a whole lot more than that. We add a piece of uniqueness and differentiation to the women's game and the women's culture. Something that doesn't let women's basketball be compared to men's, because the goal isn't to be men's basketball. The
right.
goal is to be women's basketball and to have a future that is ours, to have opportunities that are ours, and to be part of something that we're all really proud of. But the only way to do that is if you have businesses that are dedicated for the love of it and are dedicated just because they want to make the best products, the coolest marketing, and work in the space. And so long as there's big brand houses that every once in a while toss a shoe to women's basketball. And that says something, right? That says women's basketball deserves a shoe to be tossed every couple of years. Well, that's a message that we don't have, right? That's what we're shattering. We're saying we're here, we're committed, and we're making something special on a brand level, but we're also strengthening that branding and unique value proposition of women's basketball. When you do that, when you pour every dollar back into cooler products where female hoopers are performing their best, and you pour it back into higher sponsorship dollars, younger girls are able to entrench themselves in this game of women's basketball rather than shopping in the boys section and trying to appropriate it, right? They can say, this is my gear, these are my role models, and we will also see the number of people who play women's basketball grow. So it's kind of a beautiful thing, right? Where the more the bigger that we're getting, the more of an impact that we're having. And this kind of evolution came from our original mission was to fight for, quote unquote, fight for gender equality and make sneakers fit for female ballers. And we were able to get on the shelves of about 140 stores with Dick's Sporting Goods last year. They are an incredible retail partner and opening up this women's basketball space. And since then, we have evolved into understanding how much bigger of an impact we're having rather than looking across and kind of trying to chase this moving finish line, saying, wait a second, we actually could be, we are this difference maker in the market, and women's basketball has far more opportunity than I think anyone was really looking at it for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember the first time I looked at your site and I read on there that it said that like the men's game isn't, or the men's industry isn't a measuring stick for you. And I love that. You know, it's like, we are here and we are, as I said earlier, about like you're taking the industry by storm. And it's so fun for me to hear this. And like a bit while you were talking, I got like goosebumps because, you know, again, from my background, both playing and then I started working with WNBA teams like towards the beginning of the league. So like, you know, it's grown so much, but yet we have so far to come. And it really, I think, has taken on a different life in the past 3 years. I think the bubble did a lot for it. The WNBA bubble did a lot for it. And it's like, I'm just so excited and happy to hear, and just like, congratulations to you on, you know, really making such an impact and growing your brand as you are. And you talked about Dick's Sporting Goods, which is huge. And I know that you mentioned the 150 stores, but it's actually growing into a much bigger relationship from what you have shared with me before. So would love for you to share a bit about like, what is that evolution of the relationships and why did you pick them?
Yeah, so a couple folds, you know, one, right at the start of the company, I remember there was this story of a young woman who walked into one of the competing retailers and had asked for basketball shoes. And the person at the retailer said that they would rather watch paint dry than women's basketball. Wow. And so there was this Good Morning America piece that came out where Lauren Hobart, the CEO of Dick's, talked about all of the women's initiatives that they have going on at the company. And this was at a time before anything, you know, we had the product developed, but we hadn't underwent a production run. This is in the May of 2021. And they were talking about all of the different initiatives that they have going on for the female athlete. And even seeing and listening to her talk about the importance of women's basketball. And I think the importance of women's basketball in America, I mean, I'm biased, but right. I think there's really no,
I'm a little biased too.
I'm just a little bit biased, only slightly. But it is just, I mean, it's one of the biggest sports for young girls and women in America, you know, without a doubt. So she's on there really talking about how their store is becoming a destination for women's basketball. And I said, seeing that commitment and seeing how strongly Dick's Sporting Goods has taken a stand at every single level, all the way from the executive suite down to every single store associate at Dick's, the importance and care and love that they have for high performance female athletics. It was, you know, it was, of course, you don't even think about it. It's a dream come true. And so I was able to, they were generous enough to give me a meeting and to allow me to pitch the brand for potential doors. Right. And it was incredible. It went incredibly well, and Dick's has given the brand and myself so much support, not only from where they're putting us on the shelves, but also just how they've supported the company, and how they've helped me steer the company into saying, okay, these are some of the impactful marketing initiatives that we should do, and really be there for me as way more than just a retail partner.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I've seen some of the stuff that she's done, especially recently in the last few months, and it's just like amazing to see. So glad to know that you've got company like that around you. And so you mentioned there briefly campaign, and so, or initiative, and so just brings me back to, I know you've got something that's launching here in early October. And since this show is actually going to air in later October, I figured I could ask you to give us a peek at what that is. I know you've been working on it for a while.
So as long as the show is airing after October 20th, we have our brand new sneaker right behind me, the Neovolt Pro, that is launching in almost double the door count from last year. And this new shoe is unbelievable. We have absolutely every performance feature that you need to play your best game. We have a webbing lacing system that cradles your foot. We have an external TPU heel counter that makes you have a quick first step, and it allows your foot really to lock in place. And then we have an entire engineered mesh around the entire upper, and a foam package that is just, it's unbelievable. And I think when you put those shoes on, you feel all of those characteristics at work to give you a comfortable ride and keeping you pretty fresh all game. So the feedback we've gotten on our first sneaker was incredible about the fit and the feel. And now we're pairing the same fit and feel with the top performance tech that you can really put in a shoe.
Oh, that's awesome. It's so funny. As you're saying this, I'm thinking, I think I need a pair, but I don't hoop at all.
I mean, I couldn't be more excited. They're like, we worked really hard to take all of the feedback from female basketball players, and it's not hard. Everyone's like, well, how do you get all this data? Because we have hundreds of people who respond to our surveys and who help us form this product that really is going to be the right product for female hoopers. And, I say it's not rocket science. We go out and ask. I call my old AAU team. Everybody who works here calls their old AAU team. We send out the survey. We go to Run for the Roses in Kentucky, and we say, hey, guys, can you fill out this survey? We're making our second women's basketball shoe. And they say, oh, my God, yeah, I want to see these colors. This is what I care about. These are all of the characteristics that I like in a sneaker. I mean, you ask, and then we circle back, and they love them.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, you ask and you listen, and I think that, like, again, people who are involved in the sport, who are involved, we were talking about this earlier. Like, it's a culture that you have, it's a brand, and so I think to feel like I would imagine that people who you're asking, when they actually see that they're, they've been heard and they've had a voice in it and they're seeing it. I mean, I think everybody has a sense of like pride and excitement about what you're doing. So. Yeah. So tell us a bit about, if you can, I know we were talking earlier and you said to me, I said apparel and you were like, well, it's actually gear. So, and we were talking about it's a brand. So talk to me a bit about that, their language, the culture of the brand, and give the audience a bit of that vibe.
Yeah. Everything we're doing is really focused on performance, and we look at some of the great brands. A lot of people think when they hear we're going to basketball, oh my God, Under Armour, Nike, Adidas, right? And I say, oh my gosh, no, don't think that. No, not at all. Think Bauer, STX, Speedo, Lululemon, Patagonia, brands that are great on their area of focus. And that's what Moolah is, right? We are a performance expert within women's basketball. And that's our focus. We're not trying to be everything for everybody. We're trying to be the best performing product that we can be for female basketball players. And in that way, we're talking about gear and equipment, right? So when you say apparel, that kind of hits, okay, I could wear this to the street. I can wear this wherever I want. But when we're talking about gear that is on court performing my best championship game, you're wearing Moolah Kicks.
Yeah. Got it. And it's a big difference. So thank you so much for clarifying. So one of the first times we spoke, you said to me, I'm a up and coming leader. And I loved hearing that because I know I completely switched gears really quickly on there, but sorry, I wanted to go to this because
I can switch gears.
I know I wanted to go to it because I think it's something that I really have wanted to talk to you about and hear more about it. Which is your evolution. And, you said to me, as I mentioned, I'm an up and coming leader. And again, a lot of times I have this next gen edition of the show and I tend to ask these next gen up and coming leaders, like, do you realize you're a leader? And some necessarily don't. Some necessarily don't feel it yet, but you own it and you're doing it in a big way. And you've got a team of people that you're leading, small but mighty team. Exactly. And you're really out there and you are in the spotlight. And so I would love for you to share with us a bit of your own evolution and that constant conscious evolution as a leader. And also just the simple evolution from like the hardwood to the classroom to what you're doing now. So give us a peek on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, for the first 2 years of the business, I really did it with no one on formal staff, right? So it was me doing everything. And I also don't have a footwear background. I came from finance. I don't have much of a background. I started it right after college. So I don't have a big background in anything, right? Other than
hustle,
being ready to do whatever I need to do. Right. And so I think what comes with also not having as much experience, what you have is no ego either, and an ability to approach everything with fresh eyes and to learn and to learn with a fresh perspective of, is this the best way I could do it? Or continuing to question and find not only what works best in the industry, but also what works best for the company at this stage and kind of being able to think creatively outside of the box. So for the first 2 years, I learned absolutely everything I could and worked as hard as I could on as many things as I could. And that really continued and still continues today. I don't think I know everything. I am ready to learn absolutely as much as I can and work as hard as I can. And when you do that, I think it puts you in a natural position of comfortability that I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm not an expert in one, right? So, and I know that. So I can talk about finance, our accounting practices, our anything we have to do, right? Our operations, our freight, our design, but I can't sit down and say, I'm going to create the outsole blueprint. However, I know enough about it to be able to oversee it and say, okay, yes, this looks good. Can we double check some of these components? And so what those first 2 years really gave me was learning 80% of everything so that then I could hire and put the experts in place to take each part of that business the extra 20%.
Amazing. So how'd you get your start from you? So you played basketball in college. How'd you get your start?
I played club and I managed the varsity team. And I think that's really important because I was a nerd. Okay. I mean, maybe I'd go out, I of course had friends and all that, but I took school really seriously and I didn't waste a minute. And I graduated in the top 5% of my class, studied finance. I was proud of that. And I helped the whole women's basketball team with their studies. And so I managed the team and I helped the varsity team a lot with their schoolwork. And a lot of them were in the business school. And in exchange, kind of, I would play with them in the spring in pickup, right? They'd let me play pickup in Conti and we had a really good setup and I'm very, very close to them. So it was almost like all these components working at once. And as for what I did when I first started, the first step is making the last. So doing research around what that inner form of the sneaker is going to be with medical experts. And then I worked with a company called Jones and Vining. They make blue lasts, so that's how you know it's a Jones and Vining last. They are the best last manufacturer in the world. And Jim Salzano, the CEO, has been a very close advisor and probably one of the most generous people I've ever met. Has spent so much time teaching me and guiding myself and the business through really great successful times and really challenging times as well. And I've had the incredible privilege to kind of be an advisee of his since I walked into Jones and Vining 3 years ago and started making that first last.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And I purposely asked about you playing in college because for people who are listening, whether you are someone who's coming up as an athlete or you have someone in your life who's an athlete, like I think sometimes people think that the only way to stay in a sport or to impact a sport is if you play at those highest levels in that particular way. And so I think it's really great for people to hear, like, you are doing all of this in this space, but you weren't a part of a part of the team, but you weren't actually on that varsity team. So, again, I think it's like, sometimes I feel like we can be our own limits, by our own limitations by thinking, well, I'm not quite there, or, you know what I mean? And and again, anyway, so that was a very purposeful question that I asked.
Yeah. And it's appreciated. It is. 'Cause not everyone's big enough, strong enough, fast enough, good enough, but you can find what you're best at and apply it to what you love.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I mentioned this earlier, like, you're very much in the spotlight and you're very much an up and coming leader in the spotlight. And I've seen interviews of you and doing major things with major brands, obviously Dick's Sporting Goods and your Microsoft commercial and all of this. And like, I'm really curious, actually, do you sometimes feel like a bit overwhelmed by it? Or I'm sure you get like people approaching you all the time, and do you feel a need to, I know you feel a need to protect the brand. Do you feel a need to protect yourself in that at all?
No, I don't. I'm never overwhelmed by that. And I'm so thankful for everyone who knows what Moolah Kicks is and takes the time to. I do get approached a good amount, but I love it because I think that's what I signed up for. I knew sometimes is it like, okay, yeah, I feel like I don't get to have a normal, maybe like social media presence or do different things, but it's well worth it. I mean, I don't necessarily want to be the one in the spotlight. I'd rather have some of our athletes be the ones who are paying the most attention to. But I'm also really grateful that I do get to be a role model for a lot of young kids who don't necessarily want to be players, like you talked about. It's because of the press and because I'm not afraid to take those interviews that young girls reach out to me and they say, you were my favorite inventor. You're my inventor, right? For this second grade project that they're doing, and someone that they look up to. And they said, it's so cool. My class thinks you're so cool because you're alive. You're the only inventor that's alive in my class, right? Like it's like Albert Einstein, all these people that aren't alive anymore. One of the young girls chose me. And I think that's what's most exciting, right? And that is the only way that it's possible is to continue to be out in the spotlight. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity that I get to be able to do that, and that I get to be able to be that person for some of the younger kids growing up now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, speaking of generations, I'm just going to wrap this up with two final questions. Speaking of generations, is there something or some things that you wish that the generation ahead of you / older than you or generations either knew or would realize?
I think first and foremost, I'm really grateful for the groundwork that was laid by the generation ahead of me. There's a brand, no story can exist on its own. And we're only able to be here because of all the strides that were made by previous generations to fight for Title IX, to create the WNBA to I'm out here saying we shouldn't compare men's and women's basketball. But we only got to the point where we did by female leaders stepping out and doing that and demanding the same, right? So we're at this inflection point where we can have even more opportunity, but it wouldn't have been possible without the generation ahead of me laying the groundwork and fighting that fight. So I think I think I'm just grateful for everything that they did to bring the game to where it is today. Yeah. And I hope that they are able to also tweak that perspective of we did it, you know, we brought it to a point where now it can grow even more and be comfortable with that pivot away from the comparison between men's and women's.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great share. And I'll have to say, like, when I have been talking with some of my friends who I've been able to introduce you to, who are very active in the basketball space, women's basketball space, I'm sharing, like, I feel grateful that they've been like, oh my gosh, even before I was saying to you, you know, about someone like, she literally asked me to meet you. I didn't have to ask her. Yeah. And so, like, kind of that, it shows me that, like, that giving back and that appreciation and trying to help pull along at the end of the day, I think it's just this incredible movement for wanting to continue to watch the women's basketball game soar. Yeah. So that's awesome. So my last question is, I like to end every episode asking guests if you had one or two takeaways that you want to make sure that the audience gets from your episode, what would that be?
Biggest takeaway is that this is the time for women's hoops, you know, and now's the time. Rock your Moolah Kicks, get out to the games and keep playing in women's basketball. And then I think the second is for people who aren't necessarily as connected to the women's basketball sport in particular, just to see that there are so many opportunities in sports beyond what you can see. I think a lot of people always say you can only be what you can see, but I don't think that's true, right? I mean, look at me. I've never seen someone, I haven't, there's no one I don't think that I can look up that has done exactly what I've done. And I can say, oh, well, that's exactly what I want to be. So I think sometimes continuing to be yourself and apply the best parts of what you can bring and do that in an area that you love. And when you do that, you're always going to continue to be excited by the path that you're creating.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for coming in today on your Saturday morning to record with me. You are amazing. And folks listening, now you know why I said this woman blows my mind. Natalie, keep leading. I'm so excited to be part of your journey in any way, supporting you, and just really excited about all you're doing. Thank you so much for joining.
I appreciate it. And everybody go to your local Dick's Sporting Goods and check them out, try them on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody, have a great day.
Perfect. Thank you.